Hello, everyone. This is Panabon here. Obviously, I am in my regular face. There's nothing at all spooky going on this weekend or anytime ever. If you'd like to, you can call me Billy Butcherson because that's who inspired this makeup. With me tonight, I have Virus, and Virus is either from Kodioko, Paranoia, or a internet first person shooter is what you told me when you entered the chat. So would you like to say hi?
Hello.
Yes. Welcome to REM chat. This is your first REM chat, right, Virus?
Yeah, I did the Tales of the Asteria, but this is my first actual rim chat.
Oh, it's great. I love Tales of Asteria. Yeah, that's one of Tales of Asteria is our current podcast in the Alternia archives. And it is a creepy alien RPG, alien themed tabletop game being done in podcast, obviously. And yeah, this weekend is like a marathon leading up to the finale on Monday. And I'm very excited. I've been on the edge of my seat, as it were. So yeah.
My goal in life has been to play the crazy people, and I think I've done it well.
Oh, good. I appreciate that. So tonight, this is REM Chat. This is like a world building creative community thing where people can participate by either coming on the show if you're in our Discord or participating in chat. I have my phone open, so if you say something in chat, the goal is to be able to see that thing. But who knows what's going to happen because the internet is a crazy place. So we're going to have a good time and we're going to be spooky. It is the spooky edition. We're going to be talking haunted houses specifically. How this relates to world building is because houses are tiny worlds. Whether you're building a tabletop game, a play, um, whether you're building a video game, whether you're building a town, um, especially if you're building a dollhouse, I guess. Haunted houses specifically, are a great way to talk about the creative process in writing. Uh, so, Virus, I kind of want to start off with you. I would say a spaceship is really just a house in space. Would you agree with that?
I would actually. That's a pretty apt way to put it.
Yeah. How would you think? So, if I were to say we're gonna build a spaceship colony, do you feel like in Tales of Asteria, you've got all the things you need to build a house right in the ship? Like you've got like a doctor, you've got like a cook, right?
Well, you have a doctor, a cook, a pilot, a rudimentary command structure, your roughnecks, which are basically your space mechanics. So it's a little microcosm. Everything you need to build a tiny community to explain how this ship zips between planets exists there, and it's definitely a tightly confined area like a house would be.
Yeah, and as Bree says, it's a house you really can't leave. Thank you for that, Bree. And it's true. Much like a haunted house, specifically if you're looking at like a film, and there's gonna be a lot of film references tonight because films are really good at this. So if you're looking at the Alien films, you're looking at Event Horizon, which is a really great sci-fi horror film about a spaceship that is sentient, essentially.
100%.
100% creepy film. You won't sleep for a week. You'll thank me later, though. It's a really great haunted house sci-fi film, essentially. Um, yeah. So why I think haunted houses are also great to talk about in the context of world building, not just spooky, but also in real life, is that you can make some choices about the world you create based upon how you want to build your house. So there are kind of three pillars of this, and you can tell me which one Tales of Asteria fits under. Virus. So there's the haunted house that is haunted by people, haunted house that is haunted by mysteries, and the haunted house that is haunted by the supernatural. And those are kind of the three ones that I came up with. Which one of the three do you think Tales of Asteria fits under?
In all honesty, I think it's the first two. I played both pilots on Tales of Asteria, and I really geared the first one to just be insane, like completely doesn't necessarily see it in the first few episodes, but as the story goes on, if you've been listening, he is a murderous nutcase. So that would very much be the first, haunted by people and potentially haunted by the supernatural if you consider someone's insanity to be a supernatural force.
We're going to get there too. That's a third one for a specific reason, but we're definitely going to talk about places in pop culture that works, and then we can kind of in real time talk about how that works on Asteria. Because you are our window into madness, which I really love. I appreciate having a window into madness. That's not me on stream tonight. So,
Well, I am an individual. Dyslexia, dysgraphia, attention deficit disorder, and Tourette's syndrome. I feel like I'm potentially going mad at any given moment anyway, so it's kind of easier than it probably should be for me to imagine actual irrational madness.
yeah. So if we were to pop on like Alfred Hitchcock's Rear Window, which is a great example of something haunted by people and haunted by mystery, you'd probably identify with Jimmy Stewart's character. I would think.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And when we get into haunted by the supernatural, I actually grew up in a haunted house, so I can give you real world examples of what that's like as a kid.
Ooh, that sounds exciting. Let's put a pin in that.
Okay.
Yes. So let's start off talking about haunted by people. So our first example of haunted by people is Rear Window. And for you in the chat, if you can think of a film or a TV show where haunted by people sounds like kind of a great way to describe it, please put those into chat, and I will shout those out as I think they're appropriate. So, Iris, what do you think when you hear the phrase haunted by people? What do you think of?
Well, there's a couple of ways to do that. It can be haunted by a person such that it's haunted by what that person does, and it can actually be haunted by a person haunted by the memory of a person. So it is the memory of the characters left behind of the person that used to be there more than the actual presence of a person.
That's really good. That makes me think of it was a video game, then it was a film, I think. Fatal Frame. I think it's called Fatal Frame. It was about the two girls that were friends, and one of them died, and then they communicated through a camera. I believe. I could be wrong about that. It's been a long time since I've seen it. That could be a really interesting example of haunted by people, where it's haunted by the memory as well as a person.
I would even go with Girl Interrupted as another good example of haunted by people.
Sure. Yeah, and haunted by people doesn't necessarily have to mean haunted by like people as themselves. When I think about haunted by people, I think of the Romero zombie films, specifically Dawn of the Dead, where they take a place like a mall and they fill it with zombies. And so you can think of a haunted space as a space haunted by people living in memory of themselves. George A. Romero explains it really well about why they chose to use a mall for Dawn of the Dead, and I cannot say it half as good as he did. So if you can watch a behind the scenes featurette, it gives you a much better idea. But it's the idea of people going to a mall as zombies because that's what they remember and that's what they did when they were alive. So I think the Romero films, especially, are great examples of haunted by people in the traditional haunted sense.
I I would even go as far as to say haunted by people as a more cultural phenomenon. So if you consider something like Latin America Dias de los Muertos, um, and in that festival, people are really paying homage to the memory of their ancestors. So, you have the cultural phenomenon of the sugar skulls, but if you actually pay attention to the rituals themselves, people are setting up altars to their ancestors. They're putting candles and flowers and treats out for the spirits of their loved ones.
And haunted by memory can also, that can have a positive connotation like that. It can also have a negative connotation, like with a film like Shutter Island,
Oh,
where the
absolutely.
person doesn't even know they're being haunted. But it colors both the film and it colors the spaces of the film, especially because you have to watch it twice once you know what happens at the end of Shutter Island. If you haven't seen Shutter Island, great film. Um, and that's where Haunted by People really crosses over into the other two. But by abject virtue of us as people, whenever we're in a space, we're haunting it, essentially. Even spaces that are seen as temporary, spaces like trailer parks, spaces like motels. I would argue this is one of the things that the TV show Supernatural did well, is
Oh,
they
yeah.
took spaces that weren't generally seen as permanent spaces and they had people haunting them. Bars, motel rooms. A fancy term for that, fancy term for the evening, is the idea of liminal space. And this is a space that is meant to both mirror home and not be home at the same time. There's really great video game Liminal. It's not quite the same, but it's an interesting take on the concept.
Well,
Yeah.
I also see haunted by people as so in real life, I'm a sysadmin, right? So part of my job is to clean up the digital refuse that someone leaves behind when they leave an organization. And
Yeah.
they're, collect computers, collect accounts, unwind email automation and alerts, unwind accounts and authentication and permissions, and divvy this digital gratuitous up to other individuals left behind. And you can't do that without thinking about the mind that originally created these things. So you're thinking about the individual that had all of this data and this other stuff, and you have to ask yourself, okay, is the digital grim reaper as the guy that actually has to carry this information over to the souls left behind? What did the mind that originally had this data mean? So in a way, a network as a system is always haunted by the minds that came before you.
And what's interesting is in utopian dystopia. So I think of a movie like Logan's Run, where they show a perfected version of the world, or in a Twilight Zone episode, where they talk about the future and everyone's revealed to be robots or pig people. You don't get a sense of those spaces at home as home. But when you do a true dystopia future, um, like something like a sysadmin thing in Shadowrun, you really kind of feel the idea of what is home as a question because home is constantly changing and in turmoil. And Max, to your question, I don't think a person has to be dead to haunt the home. The idea is you can haunt the home. Any home where there's like a live, laugh, love thing in the kitchen, I feel like that home is probably haunted. Um, Not to say they're bad, but I think that you can create a culture of kind of haunting your own home by perfecting it. The Stepford
Agreed.
Wives movie actually talk about this a lot. The Stepford Wives and the remake have two very different takes on it. But I think being haunted by people does not necessarily mean death in the traditional sense. It can also be how you color your home. It can be what you put in your home, how messy it is, how cluttered it is. Um, but a hoarder's home from the TV show Hoarders could have the same effect as a home so pristine that it's considered a quote unquote museum. It's the two sides of that same pendulum of being able to not touch anything because you don't want it imperfect, and not touch anything because you can't find it. That's interesting. So now we can kind of go to Haunted by People, um, and talk about it in kind of our own work. So in Tales of Hysteria, you play a pilot who's gone off the deep end, quote unquote, as some people would say. Some people might think of it as like a HAL analog from 2001: A Space Odyssey, perhaps.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's a good analog. Hadn't thought of that. That's a good one.
Yeah. So it's the idea of how do you how did you, as the former captain before he became the new captain, how did you haunt how did you haunt the vessel of Asteria? Because Asteria is the name of the ship.
So the first pilot's name was Korinsky, and he wasn't the top of the command structure, but he very much saw the Asteria as part of himself. And if you listen to one of the early episodes, you'll hear him say a couple of times, "my ship." So he saw the Asteria as an extension of himself. So how he would have haunted that space is leaving things behind in the computer. So changing Sassy's sleep pod, for example. Warning, spoiler ahead if you haven't heard the podcast. He inserted a command into Mother, the ship's computer, so that when it was supposed to wake up Sassy to do the maintenance, it actually would have woken up Korinsky. So it was these, again, thinking of the sysadmin world, this digital detritus that he left behind, these command modifications or subroutine changes that were really of a reflection of the mind that created them.
I like that because that shows a very mechanical and yet human animal way of kind of haunting something. You can also haunt something in a spiritual way. So here's where you don't have to keep up with uh, with horror films or with sci-fi. You could do something really deep and philosophical, like The Lighthouse, where two men are basically battling for power between the two of them, and they're both kind of going crazy at the same time. You could also look at a Pixar film like Inside Out or Turning Red, where there's a lot of movement into different spaces that are owned by people that aren't the main characters, that are owned by their parents. Um, and I talk about Turning Red on my Everything is Gay, Even the Straight Stuff podcast that's coming up. And so I'm thinking about Turning Red still, not just because of how it references Mulan, where literal spaces are haunted by dead ancestors, but also Inside Out, where there's a haunting by people not being there, by their lack of actual presence, by how Malin's room gets changed in the course of the film. And I think it's a really interesting thing for Haunted by People that we now kind of ask some questions of our own work. So when we say Haunted by People, things you can ask yourself when you're doing the creative work, when you're writing, when you're creating characters for RPGs, when you're making characters for plays, when you're creating spaces for your characters to live in film or TV. You can ask yourself about the effect people have on the spaces in the world. And then you can start in the indoor spaces that they live and they work, if they commute underground or something like that, a la Metropolis. And then you can move to outdoor spaces.
Well,
Yeah.
I would
No, go
even
for it.
go as far as to say, haunting by people. If you take a minute to, kind of center yourself and you look around you and you say, what would not be here if it wasn't for me, for my presence? What did I bring to this space? And haunted by people could be personal mementos, a photo here, a keychain there, a Kleenex box positioned just so by the telephone,
Yeah.
or items on a bedside table. All of these things could be haunted by the person that originally set those things in place.
And that's the kind of thing where that's a really great point, a really great decision to make for how big your story is. So, in the case like that, I would say great examples of that would be if you really want something focused really tight on one person and their actions, or one or two people, you might look at a film like Memento, um, where the guy's memory is always resetting when he closes his eyes. And a lot of the film, at the halfway point, we see how other people have used that issue to their advantage. Versus something like, I had a great example, but I lost it in my brain while I was talking. So I'll say like Independence Day, where aliens are coming in and the whole planet has to come together. And so then you decide in those spaces how many people are there, what they affect, and then what is left,
Well,
essentially.
another great example of haunted by a person is actually the film Inception, because it's, Leonardo DiCaprio plays the main character, but an equally important character in the story of that film is his deceased wife and her memory and what she did to him as a person. That could be a way to haunt by a person, the effect that someone else had on you. Because that plays a really important role as the story of Inception unfolds.
Yeah, so something haunted by people can help you decide if you're struggling with your story, whatever the volume is. The idea of how much intimacy is there. So it's not really just about the stuff, it's about how close you want to be to the character. And this is where a TTRPG versus a play versus a film, this is where really choosing your medium um, kind of is important, because something like Tales of Asteria as a podcast where you're listening to a voice versus Event Horizon, which is this giant film you can see visually. Um, there's a really different sort of intimacy, not just in the story, but how you react to it as an audience. So, Memento versus Inception are both films, but then the intimacy within them changes how we think about them, how the idea of haunted by people works. But that was, yeah, but haunted by people. It's enough to make you think about your work and about what it means. As a queer playwright, haunted by people for me often means haunted by what are the expectations both of being queer in the space and of the space outside, where being queer may not be as accepted. Um, I think you see that in my work. Hopefully, you see that in my work. But the idea of haunted by people is really about how a person manipulates a space. Because no matter where we go and what we do, there's always a space you manipulate. Even if it's just your bedroom, you manipulate something in your world, because otherwise you wouldn't be there. And that's really what haunted by people is. Otherwise, you wouldn't be there. Like Virus. I'm paraphrasing Virus, which is really fun. All right. So then we're going to go to Haunted by Mysteries, and this is kind of about the idea of beats in storytelling. So Virus, do you know what beats in storytelling are?
I do.
Okay. Uh, so yeah, because not everyone knows, and I don't want to assume what people know, but so I'm just going to give a real, very brief primer of a beat. There are two types of beats in telling stories. There's an action beat or a physical beat, and often those are called major beats. Sometimes when people talk about a different act structure, they'll use major beats to tell the rhythm of the story. But you've also got minor beats, and these are often dialogue, these are emotional, these don't often involve physical things, but they can. And mysteries take advantage of this kind of traditional 3 or 5 act structure, depending upon what you're doing, and it uses beats to move the story along. But you can be haunted by mystery, haunted by beats. And what I say by that is if you look at movies like Suspiria, where there are witches at a ballet dance academy, and for this I recommend the 70s version because I think it's a lot more colorful, but the one on Amazon Prime, apparently people really like. It's not my cup of tea, but that's fine. A movie like Clue, even something like Crimson Peak, which is a non-traditional mystery, and I kind of want to talk about that too, talking about how we present our work. So I'll come back to that. But haunted by mystery, you can think of this in that traditional Agatha Christie, and then there were none sort of way, Murder on the Orient Express, because unfortunately people were still using the word Orient back then. Um, when I said haunted by mysteries, what did you think of, Virus, when I said haunted by mystery? Hello?
Wrong button. So when you
Wrong button.
see things like Haunted by Mystery, I think of Long Knives, Thousand Knives. The mystery in itself, the unknown itself, is essentially a character. So its presence in the world, the weight of the unknown in the world, has a real emotional and cognitive weight to the story.
I love that. This is something also you see a lot, haunted by mystery, in video games. So I think about Max Payne. I think about the Bioshock series, where there's always a mystery that is revealed at the end, and it colors how you view the rest of the story that you just played through. Video games use a lot of those traditional beats now, especially to tell stories because people kind of expect that. They didn't always. Once upon a time, it was just level upon level, and you made your own story as you went along. But I like the way it is now. So we've got a thing about haunted by mystery is mystery really is the ultimate way to decide something like atmosphere. So you've got the what was it called? The Night of Long Knives, Thousand Knives. What was it?
Thousand Knives is one
Thousand
good
Knives. Yeah.
example.
Yeah. So it's the idea of using mystery to decide how much people are haunted by it. So if you look at something like Clue, where it's kind of a humorous take on the idea of a mystery versus and then there were none where it's played very straight, or the House on Haunted Hill, where the kind of damsel in distress character is basically becoming more unhinged as the story goes along because it was made in 1953. Um, you can look at the idea of mystery not just as a way to be like, these are what I need to do as my steps to finish the story, but the idea of being haunted by mystery is also about the atmosphere of what it does to a story. Max Payne is a great example of that. The Bioshock series is an example of atmosphere informing the mystery and making it deeper. Um, and so I like to talk about the idea of mystery both as kind of a formal idea in work but also is a way that influences
So
how you make choices.
in the late 90s, early thousands, let me look up the actual date here. There was a great film called Dark City.
Yes, really great film. It's not in the horror top 100 on Shudder, which made me sad, but people have been referencing it, and I appreciate people bringing that back into the world.
Yeah, so Dark City, there's kind of the mystery of who the main character actually is. There's the mystery of some kind of crazed serial killer running around the city. And there's the mystery of a place. And it's not really till you get close to the climax of the film that you understand how all of these things connect together. And it's, I had to watch Dark City 3 or 4 times before I really get it, because if you watch Dark City in a mind job, how the mysteries as you watch Dark City in a vacuum, how these mysteries weave together is really kind of a mind job. It messes with you. And I think that's an example of how Haunted by Mystery can really be exalted to a good art form in and of itself.
Yeah, and mystery. So before I go back to Crimson Peak, I want to talk about two things. Don't let me forget the second one because I'll forget. So I want to talk about Children of Men, but before I do that, I want to talk about mystery and being haunted by mystery as a way to figure out your time structure for your work as well. So if you look at Scooby Doo or if you look at a Twilight Zone episode, those are short mysteries. And you can use a short mystery to create a short story, or you can really stretch it out and do an Agatha Christie style 300 pager, or 300 pagers if it's a Hercule Poirot story. And mystery is a way to figure out exactly how long you want your mystery to go on for and how many reveals you need. It's a great mechanical way to figure out how you want to color your world. When you think about the Family Guy episode, and then there were fewer, which was somehow both a clue epilogue, but also an and then there were none story, that had to happen over an hour. They couldn't do it any shorter, and they couldn't really press it any longer because of the format. So it can help to know after you've decided your genre, after you've decided how intimate you're going to be with the audience, if it's a play versus a TV show versus a film, or a video game or a TTRPG, then you can decide kind of within that structure how long you want the mystery to be and what you can get away with and how shocking you want to be. You can also do something like Children of Men, where there are kind of these implicit mysteries that are never examined. In Children of Men, people have stopped having babies, but they never answer why in the film. But it colors the atmosphere of the whole film as a mystery that no one's been able to solve. Children of Men is a great movie, sad movie, very very harrowing, not a happy family film by any stretch of the imagination. But Haunted by Mystery can be very useful in deciding kind of length of time for your mystery. So for Tales of Hysteria, how many mysteries would you say you currently have going on? Is it really are the mysteries all involving Kerensky and then your second pilot self, or are there other mysteries happening concurrently with it?
Well, really, I would consider Kerensky and the second pilot to really be more PCs in and of themselves. The overarching mystery was a bit darker, involving Wayland Nutani. And for the listeners that haven't heard the podcast yet, I don't want to spoil anything, certainly. As a player, it was wonderful to see how the game master in that world called a game mother after the computer system laid it out. But I mean, that Game Master really kept the players guessing right up until our final marathon play session. So she did a really good job.
I can believe
Another
that. Yeah.
another good example of Haunted by Mystery is actually the game MechWarrior 5. So it's ever present in the world. You don't have to go right after it, but it tinges the color of how the character you're playing as sees the world. And in MechWarrior 5, it's actually the person's parentage. And what you discover is that, again, spoiler ahead, for those of you that are Battletech fans that might be listening to this, it turns out that the person whose point of view you're playing from is actually the child of a clanner. And MechWarrior 5 takes place in the Battletech universe, and the game ends right before the invasion of the clans. But it's, I thought my dad was a mercenary, but he actually wasn't a mercenary. So what the hell was he? What is all this strange communication going out to what I think of as uninhabited space? And that mystery as you're playing through the game's main storyline really kind of tinges how you see the entire world.
Now, what's really nice about Tales of Asteria is that your GM game mother is Ava, who's a staple of the REM community, and on Monday nights is part of Paranormal Albany, which is a Harry Dresden RPG, and they have um, overarching mysteries about what is going on in Albany, but they've also got kind of internal mysteries, which is really cool. This is something you don't see on Scooby Doo much because they don't do it, but you see it in Harry Dresden, who does this really great kind of magical film noir as a genre, where there's always both a mystery for the character and a mystery kind of in the overarching world. And sometimes they dovetail, sometimes it takes like 3 books for them to dovetail. It's really cool to kind of see the way that potentially the Harry Dresden RPG or other kind of magic mystery games influenced how Ava created this wonderful dark sci-fi journey that I hope everyone has been listening to, because Tales from Mysteria is kind of amazing and it's a lot of fun. And it's happening all weekend long, so you can catch up and get to the point where you're because we're releasing episodes every day. I think the next episode will actually release tomorrow morning. And it's super cool because it's just right in time for Halloween, which is also when Paranormal Albany comes back. Paranormal Albany will be back on Monday night, this Monday on Halloween, which is going to be super fun. So, Haunted by Mystery, I hope I've given you some good things to look at, some questions to ask yourself, but for referencing how you work in your own work, what Haunted by Mysteries can mean, you can think about the idea of what is your story building to, how is the atmosphere influenced by mystery, what does it mean to solve something even? You can take the idea of the word mystery and deconstruct it and be like, what does it mean to have a mystery? Which is something that if you're familiar with like the Silent Hill games, I feel like they do really well. You have to be able to enjoy the gore because it gets very gory, but Silent Hill games and things like that, I feel like do really well in the idea of what is mystery and how does it change the world. And you can also decide, use a mystery to decide how much of the world your players see. In Tales of Asteria, for instance, the universe is a very big place, but you're only seeing a small portion of it. It's enough to give you a taste of the universe. And if you were listening into the Saints and Sinners podcast that I was on, that's a different portion of space in a different universe, but it has other levels of mystery to it. So Haunted by Mystery is a great way to really help you build your world.
So
and build build the length of story.
Before we move away from Haunted of Mystery, you did say somebody needed to bring you back to Child of Men.
Yes, Children of Men. I touched on. I did. It wasn't the big thing, but it was more about the idea of there's an overarching mystery people have kind of gave up on, but it's always there because it colors the opening of the story when the youngest person in the world dies at like 30. But it also colors how everybody reacts to the story. It colors how dilapidated and graffiti the spaces are. It colors the scientist that lives out in the middle of nowhere, played by Michael Caine. I think it's Michael Caine, and how his space is built. So the idea of the mystery and the idea of giving up on the mystery, and the idea of how does hope permeate the space and how does imagination permeate the space. Those can be big, but that feels like a much bigger thing as I'm saying it out loud. Children of Men, though, great movie, sad movie, not a happy time for anyone. But Clive Owen is in it, and Clive Owen is fantastic. Thank you for reminding me. I didn't know if I'd have anything else to say about that. Um, Also, if you need to, Haunted by Mystery, look at the Cat Who books or look at Scooby Doo. There's no shame in looking at Scooby Doo. Scooby Doo did a really great shorthand for how do you send characters to a place you wouldn't expect them to be, and people just really went along with it. Also, because it was the 60s and it was Hanna-Barbera's world, we were just living there. And the final part of this tonight is the idea of being haunted by the supernatural. This is more horror driven. This is kind of more classic. This is where you can really kind of go balls to the wall with the metaphysical question. This is where you can really go into Shining territory and start really messing with your spaces to make a point. But this is also where you can do very small things that can really influence your story. When I say haunted by the supernatural virus, what do you think of?
So again, I grew up in a house that was haunted. So when I personally think of haunted by the supernatural, I think of manifestations. One of the manifestations that I recall quite vividly is a translucent man dressed from the waist up, because that's all you could see. He was invisible from the waist down, in kind of turn of the 1900s, a turn of the 20th century dress. Music that sounded like it came from an old phonograph. A porch swing on a wraparound porch swinging when there was no wind. Thermal manifestations. So unexplainable cold spots in certain areas. If you watch Ghost Hunter episodes, you see some of the same things. If you ever played the game Phantasmophobia, again, you're experiencing some of these things. I would call them almost tropes. They appear so commonly. But definitely things that I myself have experienced in an actual haunting situation. I live not too awful far from the Kings Mountain battleground, and there are pictures and stories and local lore of individuals fuzzy in appearance, and by fuzzy I mean as if you take a picture of them, they're unfocused. Individuals appearing in Revolutionary War dress. If you look up the Phantom Regiment in Gettysburg, that is an entire regiment that appears to be in Union Civil War colors that will march their formations and then suddenly disappear. There are other the woman in the gray dress is, of course, a common trope you hear in this area. On the coast of the Carolinas, there's the specter known as the Gray Man. And if you actually Google, Gray Man video, a couple of years ago when a strong hurricane hit the Carolina coast before the storm really came ashore, there were actually web camera footage of this gray, nearly translucent specter that appeared walking on piers. So, translucency, of course, cold spots, um, characters that just appear in the visual plane and then disappear. All kinds of things could be supernatural.
We've got so what's really great about that is that these physical manifestations are both happening personally, but they're also stories, which is a really great thing to think about. Is that you can decide how much of this feels intimate to the player, like it's personally happening, and how much has kind of what I call an "Are you afraid of the dark" campfire feel, where you can decide how far removed someone is from the story, and how much that would leave them desiring to go there or desiring to stay away from there. Of course, this leads into different versions of the horror genre. You've got what's called a found footage, which is like a Ghost Hunters, but is also like a Blair Witch Project or a Deadstream, or even one of the VHS films, which is both an anthology work, so it's small stories, but it's an overarching narrative of how different versions of the supernatural impact the world to varying degrees of success depending upon which VHS you are watching. I personally enjoyed VHS 2, VHS 94, and 99, which just came out, although I think both 1 and Viral have merits. So those are ways where it seems like you're eavesdropping on something. Paranormal Activity, if you're looking for a specifically haunted house one, where it seems more modern. The Paranormal Activity, the first movie especially, is really about a modern home and what it means to be quote unquote haunted. We've also got kind of a really great classic haunted house trope where you can look at how old you want the house to be. You've got like a 13 Ghosts where there's like a clockwork system underneath the house. It's also really great, a really great visual movie. You've got the House on Haunted Hill films. You've got The Haunting, which is really about the idea of taking space and stretching it out and making a mystery of the space itself. And so in the 63 Haunting especially, you never actually see the ghosts. And a ghost that you do see in the movie is, it's unclear whether it's a ghost or it's a person. And in the remake of The Haunting, they actually do show a ghost, because in the remake in the 90s, they really weren't sure, because we weren't doing that anymore, how to do that. They didn't know how to trust the audience. You can decide how much you're showing to decide how much the audience can trust your work and how much of a reliable narrator you want to have. The Haunting is a great movie to watch if you want to look at how to avert space and make it seem longer or shorter, make it seem haunted, but also make it seem like your character might be an unreliable narrator who is losing their mind. If you like found footage and you really want to go down the rabbit hole, you could look at something like Grave Encounters, where they mix horror with kind of the Cthulhian sci-fi. Grave Encounters does that, or Hell House, where they go very religious. And you can use the idea of being haunted by the supernatural, not just in talking about ghosts. Like Virus said, you can talk about other things associated with it. I would also say haunted by the supernatural, you could look at something like Repo the Genetic Opera or Rocky Horror Picture Show, where even though it's a different kind of story, either a Frankenstein narrative or a story about power and money in the dystopian future, it's also a story about how people interact with the world and how they build a world around themselves. Rocky Horror Picture Show especially is about that. They sing songs about it. You say haunted by the supernatural. Really, you can look in your work about how stylized your world is, how accepting of the supernatural it is. Dimension 20 did a show where they had like a seance, but everyone in the world were badgers. So they were like anthropomorphized animals that still had almost a humanistic view of the future. But then you get a musical like Cats, where they're anthropomorphized cats, but they don't have the same view of the afterlife as a human have. They have a very much almost cat-like view of it. And I mean watching the actual stage show, not the nightmare film. So something that's great about being haunted by the supernatural is that you kind of get to ask big questions in your world, especially about death, about vengeance, about love, about power. You can also use it to stylize, because if you want to have like Civil War style people in your world, you have to figure out how to get them there, especially if you want the stylized clothing. I'm not saying it's a good idea, but I'm saying that if you want to do something more current, if you want to do something using some of these kind of Carolina Coast ghosts, I'm going to call them, um, if you want that style, then you have to decide how you want to use it, why you want to use it, if it's a good idea, and then you have to grapple with what it means to have that representation in your universe. So yeah.
Well, it's, you know, I think of other great films that are haunted by the supernatural. I think of The Ring, which came out in 2002. Great
Or
horror
Ring,
fest.
or The Ring, which is the Japanese version of it, obviously, because
Yep,
it was a
yep,
remake of.
yeah. Which either one, great horror fests. If that's what you want to watch this time of year, cannot recommend enough. There's also the idea of the Keystone Ghost. So a Keystone spirit is a spirit tied to a mass casualty event. And that spirit haunts so that all of the other spirits attached to that event don't have to haunt. And if you banish or vanquish or remove the keystone spirit, I think back to my college days of programming, right? So, I try to compile my code, I fix all the bugs, I get down to one error, I correct that error, and all of a sudden I have 1,000 new errors. Where a keystone ghost is kind of the same thing. You vanquish that last spirit, and then all of the spirits tied to that mass casualty event begin to manifest. So it's another kind of, again, related to storytelling beats that, oh, you think of yourself, nope, this is a false crescendo. All of a sudden you have 1,000 new problems. So that's another way that you can leverage the supernatural.
And what's really nice is how horror plays with the supernatural and how sci-fi plays with the supernatural. Specifically thinking about how HAL 9000 in 2001: A Space Odyssey, but also thinking about subgenres of horror like the body horror, where it's not necessarily about a supernatural, but there's something supernatural-esque about, say, Society or Cabin Fever, or even Cabin in the Woods is a really great version of a horror film that examines what it means to have supernatural entities and how they color the world, and to do it both with horror and with humor. Um, Haunted by the Supernatural is a great way to decide how funny your world is, if you're going to go full on scream or if you're going to go idle hands with it, essentially. Which is a really cool kind of question to ask yourself, because Haunted by Supernatural doesn't have to be about ghosts, doesn't even have to be about deity, but Haunted by Supernatural is a question of afterlife and death in a way. It's a question about mortality, it's a question about self. And so Haunted by Supernatural is always good to use to ask yourself questions about what is the message you want to use to send out into the universe with this work, because all work is colored by a message you're trying to send out. That's what takes the work from good to great. So you should always be able not to have an elevator pitch of 30 seconds for work, but you should always be able to identify what the message is. Like if I ask you, Virus, from your point of view, what was the message of Tales from Asteria? Without spoiling it, obviously, because we still have a couple episodes left coming out this weekend. But for you, what was the message of Tales of Asteria?
Well, so I don't think I can get to the message without spoiling it, but what I can say is that the game mother did an excellent job of even keeping us as players guessing about what would happen next. And to Ava's credit, she would drop little hints about, oh, I have this great idea, I'm just looking for how to spring it. And when the sprawling finally happened, I think we as players just found that moment delicious. And you'll hear that coming up. Our reactions as the final spring took place.
And you can decide as a writer too how important that is to you, to leave people guessing, because you look at something that is highly stylized, that has sort of a mystery, some scenes, but not. Like when I think about the Power Rangers, each season unto itself, there is sometimes an overarching thing, but sometimes it's just the smaller mysteries of life. And you can kind of decide how big you want those questions to be, but those questions are always there. And I hope listening into Tales of Asteria, you have a lot of fun with that, with the guessing, and I hope it creates a lot of really great conversation. I'm so excited to finish Tales of Asteria with everyone else, so I'm excited that you were able to come on today, Virus. I really appreciate you being here. So for Rem, what we have going on is on Monday nights coming up, we're going to have Paranormal Albany is coming back. Tuesday, we have Shadowrun Chicago Missions. On Wednesday, every other week is going to be Shadowrun Denver. So they just had an episode this past week. If you didn't get to tune in, I hope that you might take some time to listen, because Shadowrun Denver was talking about kind of how they're going to have GM changes. It was really an episode about world building and about what mattered to the players in the world and also to the world itself. What's interesting about tabletop gaming as an art form is it's so collaborative, and it's not just about building a world, but it's also about players building alongside the person in charge. And I feel like you really feel that with Shadowrun Denver. So if you get a chance and you haven't, you can check out that episode. I think it's on YouTube now. And that would be Wednesday. Thursday, of course, is GenCon TV at 4 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, which would be 7 p.m. Eastern. There's the Rules of Cool interview. Last week we had Fasa, who helped create Earth Dawn. I don't know who's going to be next week because I don't get that information right away, but it's going to be really awesome. Rules of Cool is an hour-long interview. And after that, there's either a one-shot show of some kind. It's been Prowlers and Paragon recently. But there's also been the kind of continuing drama, saga, mystery, haunted by the supernatural of the stuff that happens in Shadowrun with Emerald Glitch, which is really cool. They just had a charity auction. I think they just took something. And then, of course, Fridays, next Friday coming up, and I have to look up the date because I don't have it right in front of me because I'm a bad person. But on November 11th is going to be the next trivia night, because that is going to be the second Friday of the month. So November 11th, because you are all here and you are good people, I'm going to let you know the theme. If you want to get involved, you'll have to come into the Discord to get involved, but you can get involved with the trivia on the 11th, and that's going to be kind science fiction themed. Not a science fiction double feature, but a science fiction trivia night specifically for science fiction. If you're a science fiction person, bring it. See if you can get a spell to cast against Chris, since they have a spell. And then on Saturdays in November, I don't have a date for this yet, but your Saturday morning Descent into Avernus is returning in November on Saturday mornings. So get your favorite sugary cereal, your favorite milk, and your favorite character plushie for Descent into Avernus. And then on Sunday nights, of course, join me as Panabon, not looking like this, but in my normal jewel eyebrowed goodness as Panabon for Sunday night like clockwork steampunk D&D. And then we start it all over again on Monday. And I want to thank you all for coming here tonight. Thank you, Max, who was our tech in the booth back there, the Eponymous booth that you can't see. And I want to thank you, Virus, for joining us. Thank you, everyone, for stopping by. And I hope you have a great start to your Halloween weekend. Good night, everybody.